Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the new double album from Bill Callahan called Shepherd in a Sheepskin Vest. So I'd like to continue off with something I brought up in the Wise Blood review, and it does come with a bit of self-awareness on my part. I opened up that conversation with the discussion surrounding the sudden critical convergence that can happen around indie acts for a single project that can then leave just as quickly. But there's another category of acts in an adjacent lane. The indie acts who do get consistent critical acclaim, but never seem to reach the larger conversation. A lot of singer-songwriters and smaller skill acts, they wind up in this group. The folks that will reliably make critics' year-end lists, but rarely at the top. And while they will have a persistent cult following, they tend to be artists that even critics forget to revisit. Until, out of the blue, they decide on a lark to give the album another spin, and then they're stuck wondering why the hell they don't put it on more often. Which is not quite as bad of a situation as what happens to the one-album critical darling, but it can be deflating for an artist who would probably wish their name came up in the conversation just a little bit more. And for me, I can't think of many acts that fit that bill more than Bill Callahan. Previously known as Smog for a string of good to spectacular albums throughout the 90s and 2000s, until he switched to using his own name in 2007, and the quality never seemed to waver. And again, I'll admit I was late to this party. I first heard some of his work with Apocalypse in 2011, but it was Dream River in 2013 that really sealed the deal. A stunningly subtle and potent album that featured one of my favorite songs of that year in Summer Painter, and brought a level of cohesion and laconic focus to his brand of writing and production. It's rare to confront a singer-songwriter who can say and imply so much with so few words. In the 2010s, the only singer-songwriter who comes close to that sort of style and what Callahan delivers is probably Courtney Marie Andrews, and even stylistically, they're in different phases of their career and very different lanes in Americana. But there is a similar, road-weary, textured atmosphere that both can command that gives their words so much more presence and sticking power. But it's been a while since we've heard from Bill Callahan. He put out a dub album covering his own project Dream River in 2014 and a live album in 2018, but it's been a while since we've got new material, and he's got a lot of it. A full double album with a renewed focus on his current domestic life. He got married, he had a kid. Now, I'll admit I have had some mixed results with these sort of projects just because of the phase of life that I'm in. It's one of the reasons that Laurie McKenna's The Tree didn't quite hit as strongly for me that year, and there's something who deserves to be in that conversation. And you know what? 20 songs of Bill Callahan's style and cadence, that's a lot. But I figured I'd let this sink in, really take it in. So what do we get out of Shepherd in a Sheepskin Vest? You know, these reviews always feel like the hardest for me to do, because I've gone over this double album multiple times, and like Dream River, I'm generally impressed by its thematic cohesion and its writing, and how well Bill Callahan plays with sounds and atmosphere of a template to which you really wouldn't expect this level of complexity. It's a sprawling, shaggy, frequently meandering project that clocks over an hour and will absolutely wind down some lyrical rabbit holes, but I can also argue it's got a genuine emotional core, and the highlights, they are striking. And man, I wish I liked the whole a little bit more. Maybe I was spoiled by Dream River feeling so self-contained and meticulous in the composition, but Shepherd in a Sheepskin Vest is the sort of indulgent double album built for the larger cult following. And by that, I mean the group that's been on board since Smog and the more electronic-tinged side ventures. And yeah, I've always felt a little bit distant to that as a whole. Not saying I didn't like or respect what Bill Callahan's doing here, as from a lyrical standpoint, he remains top-notch, but sonically, this is more scattered and slapdash, and I'm left with a frustrating feeling that a little bit of tightness might have made this among one of the best of the year. It's really close to greatness, but not quite there for me. And yet, before we get into all that songwriting, I think it's important to establish how Bill Callahan approaches this project as a singer, which is to say with a very meandering, slightly slipshod delivery where the tightness comes in fits and spurts, and there are parts where he just outright drops into a conversational cadence. And given the length of this, there are some who have already drawn the comparisons to Mark Kozlek, aka Sun Kill Moon, but Bill Callahan's delivery is more quietly self-assured and a little bit more melodic. His his supple baritone always provides some welcome reassurance and a warmth that no matter what fidelity comes through with his voice, and there are some lo-fi passages on this album, that introverted support will always remain in place, with fewer words that seem more carefully chosen, but never to the point of feeling overthought, or where the song just couldn't devolve into free verse at any one point, which is where the first very important slice of irony comes in. Because with such an approach, it flies in the face of a lot of the newfound stability that comes with a wife and family that Bill Callahan now has. So while the content might imply some peace and stability and contentment, the structure of all these songs implies how it could all shudder apart at any moment, and the increased length only accentuates the musings on permanence and consistency that flesh out the subtext of this album. Because you can tell this whole new marriage, the matrimony, the kid, that was unexpected for him on some level, especially coming off of the frank acknowledgments of the fractured relationship arcs that fleshed out Dream River, and especially in continuing the seaman metaphors for lonely, oft misunderstood, but plenty self-absorbed artists meandering into uncertainty and danger, a life that seemingly every man will idolize to a point. Because of the newfound, stronger love and a connection to family, priorities will inevitably shift, and those men who previously only had their own needs and path to trace, now it's been diverted for them. And I find it fascinating how much Bill Callahan really wants to delve into that larger metaphor, especially for as much as it could paint him in a questionable light. I brought up how the lonely seaman gambling and whiling away his time, now becoming more of a fisherman supporting those on shore, and yes, we will come back to that metaphor for the album's end, but the more stark symbolism, it comes through in the album's title of all things, and gets referenced here. A shepherd in a sheepskin vest, a protector who is clearly slain to protect his heart, but then will continue to protect and shear his flock. And note that only when the vest comes off, the children come forth, a vulnerability that will stagger him. Hell, he even draws a comparison to himself with the Hulk, in a song called Ballad of the Hulk, but specifically to the Bill Bixby version, who played Bruce Banner with unflinching, careful gentleness across his wanderings on that show. But I don't want to discount how much he fears for his art here either, weighing all the more heavy with the obligations to support his family, but also how his muses might be slipping away in the immensity of domestic commitment of his life ahead. It feels good to cut loose on writing, but his tunes become both blessing and curse in those they entice. Whereas writing will pull him out of Eden on young Icarus, but it's a wandering that's never truly faced that hot light of day and whatever spiral might come out of that. And then those metaphors will then converge on Son of the Sea, where his spoken interlude he wonders how giving birth nearly killed his artistic spirit, leaving just lullabies behind. Because after all, if you're in that state, how can you make drama? But this is where Bill Callahan tips his hand to the genuine genius of this love story. Because as much as he will show the smaller details of domestic bustle, he references Sesame Street for God's sakes, he's never forgotten the idea of time and the pressing weight on his psyche, or the dichotomy between hunter and protector as a man's role. It's a little bit jarring that whenever there is sex reference on this album, like on Confederate Jasmine, there is blood, but it's not being drawn by a rapacious predator, but by a shared connection that will run thicker. Or take how he references the stock footage of Heaven on 747, a song all about how mundane travel reinforces that loving connection, which leads right into how he is staggered by the immensity of the choice of his time, love, and vulnerability on Watch Me Get Married. But then comes the loaded central question of what comes after certainty, one taking on a vacation where Bill Callahan sneaks a signature onto Willie Nelson's guitar, having felt true love, but what the hell is next? If true love is certainty, what's after? What the hell is he next? As that question of larger identity is referenced on Call Me Anything, as the opening verse shows how he was never everything he said he was, just trying to describe something that he can never quite put to words about who he is. Not a lie, just kind of not a full truth. And then there's how the weight of death casts a longer shadow indeed across When We Let Go and Circles. Because there's a question of how that certainty persists across the unknowable. And that's also one huge reason how I really love how the album ends with the beast. The man must go out into the open water to face an unknowable fate. The artist does this, with death circling around, but love leaving him undaunted to face that great beast. The obvious parallel returns to the central force of ego that is reminiscent of the old man in the sea, but the more more obvious literary reference is to the short poem by William Butler Yeats called The Second Coming, as both are framed with similar apocalyptic scale and weight. And the references, they really hold across the album. The patriarchal lion leaving and returning to the crest as a similar beast is stymied in its challenge in the face of new life. The line, the best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity, it might as well parallel every question Bill Callahan asks of himself in his role. But note the subtle inversion on the beast. Love has changed him. He's embraced vulnerability and a feedback relationship between himself and his partner with blood and art and music holding that conduit, and the center holds. And while there's upheaval around him, it has made him better and has led to a moment of triumph and arguably the best closing song that Bill Callahan has ever made. So, alright, brilliant, layered writing, the sort of singer-songwriter intricacy, the mastery that shows Bill Callahan damn near, he makes it look easy with this delivery. Why am I not calling this a great album again? Well, you know what? For as deceptively layered and interwoven as this might all seem to be, and for as much as the length further emphasizes the immensity of the decisions that are being made, we're still dealing with a 20-song double album that more than a few times finds itself sliding towards undercooked instrumental moments that only feel peripheral to the larger messages that are being sold, connected by a single couple of lines to the larger narrative and little else. Now, I will credit Bill Callahan for trying to keep a long album diverse by drawing upon the broader palette of sounds he's used before. He'll shift across lo-fi tones and acoustic guitars, percussion, bass, and vocals, and there are even points where he'll tap into slightly firmer backing vocals from his wife, Hanley Banks Callahan, or even some buzzier synths as an accent, although no electric guitars, bizarrely enough, or not ones that are prominent in the mix. But this raises the question of whether the individual pieces will hold together on an album like this, because that does kind of be important. And again, it's kind of hit and miss. There is a part of me that's convinced that individual cuts like the keening glitch around Ballad of the Hulk, the meandering acoustic interplay of What Comes After Certainty and Confederate Jasmine, the gentle coasting of 747 with the sandy percussion that makes a nice reprise on Son of the Sea, the warm country-esque gentleness of writing Watch Me Get Married, or the piano accent and traditional cover Lonesome Valley, or even the more textured percussion bounce off the surprisingly upbeat Call Me Anything, they could have held this project together on their own in a tighter package, with of course the massive shuddering climax on the beast as the acoustics and yawning bass build off the feedback. That was a fantastic closer. But beyond those, it's hard not to feel like if you trim out a few of the less structured acoustic pieces, or maybe add a little bit more foundational groove or a fragment of an actual hook to those pieces, this album wouldn't drag the way it does. Yeah, it's designed to be contemplative and meditative. It's sitting on the front porch in the dawn just listening to it music, to ponder and connect the words being spoken, and it does feel longer than it actually is, and that's kind of the point. But it's more also because it flows and fits in spurts, and whenever the experimentation hits a bit of a bum note, you got patches where the momentum just stops and it can be tough to sustain a lot of attention, especially when you want to pay attention because the writing's so good and yet the backdrop is not as interesting. And that's a tricky thing with this album. As I said at the beginning, it's absolutely best suited to a longtime Bill Callahan fan who's been on board for his considerable sonic evolution, and you can trace all those lyrical reference points. If you're looking to jump on board with this, it can be rewarding, but I can also see it as being very daunting and probably can feel a little too meandering and thin at points to be as rewarding as Dream River immediately was, especially given how acoustic and mild-mannered Bill Callahan is. And that's the tricky part for me to evaluate it, because I would love to call this great, but I am in a with this one, if only because for as many great moments as it has, I'm not quite sure it's got enough truly transcendent moments to tip it over all the way, which means I'm going to give it an extremely strong 7 out of 10, an absolutely recommendation, but one where you need to be willing to put in the time and effort decoding a project that's more diffuse and scattered than Dream River ever was, and it's not nearly as immediate. Still, overall, it's rewarding, it's potent, and as I said a couple days ago on Twitter, the timing of this album's release so close to Father's Day, it's inspired. This is very much a dad album in that lane. So yeah, really damn good stuff. Take the time, check this out. It's good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. It's a double album. I had a lot to say. If you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. I got the poll up there. I'm curious where Bill Callahan fans will fall on this, because they will probably all see this. There's not a lot of us in that sort of cult following. And it's an interesting listen. I like to think that there's a level of lyrical intricacy that puts it over the top, but didn't quite get there for me. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you actually want to follow me on like any social media, I don't typically advertise it, but Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, look for Spectrum Pulse. You will find me there. I'll typically post my videos and arguments stuff there. Also some updates surrounding my schedule. So if you're curious, there you can find me. And beyond that, if you're looking for where Billboard Breakdown is, the link is in the card right over here. New episode probably dropping tomorrow. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.